My novel puts a human face on the Cold War by focusing on the psychological burdens of its characters rather than on Byzantine plot or high politics. Doubt and paranoia bred in a culture of secrecy characterize the novel, as does a sophisticated amorality of men at the top of intelligence bureaucracy, and above all, there is the strain put on family, friends, and faith. Men who work in covert operations inevitably bring some of that darkness into themselves, suffering the moral hazards of a line of work that sanctions lying, deceit, and murder. The interplay of state secrets and individual lives is central to the novel. Chapter 1. Washington, D.C., 1953. A solid man of average height, not yet 30 years old, stood in the ninth-floor hotel room and placed the telephone in its cradle, ending a difficult conversation. His tuxedo was at odds with the room's drab, charmless atmosphere, and he brushed hair from his forehead with the unconscious gesture of a man whose sense of entitlement was rattled. He walked to the window, sipping from the 2 fingers of scotch he'd poured into a paper cup, and gazed at the dark clouds that blanketed the resting city. A curse slipped from his lips. Shit. Philip Treacher pondered the lie that he had just told his wife to explain why he wouldn't be joining her that night at the president's Thanksgiving gala. He misled friends, misrepresented himself to neighbors, and regularly carried out assignments that required him to go dark or use an alias. But this was his first lie to his new wife. She knew he worked for the CIA, and she had come to understand in the first months of their marriage that when he came home in a sullen mood, there had been a problem at work. And she knew not to ask. They had established boundaries for their conversations, and his grimace was a signal that he couldn't answer her questions. But when he drank heavily at dinner, she guessed that a Soviet double agent had died, and his harsh interrogation had been a success. Treacher had tried to soften the blow by starting the conversation with a few questions about inconsequential things. Her gown back from the tailor for the weekend gala. Does it fit? And gossip about who would be at the White House and who would not. Casual chat that he kept up heroically until she interrupted. "What's wrong? Where are you?" He said something unexpected had come up and he wouldn't be able to make it. Her silence was the longest of their marriage, and without saying more, he knew she would ask the question that he couldn't answer. He felt a terrible responsibility to keep her in the dark about an urgent national security matter of acute sensitivity. He considered letting her hold on to her shock and anger, but he felt the need to offer a plausible explanation that she could tell other guests who asked why she'd come alone. "I've been called out of town." Regret, guilt, remorse. These were the feelings that he permitted himself in the moment of his deception. But he had not considered, even for a moment, describing what he was doing a few blocks away in the Hotel Harrington. Treacher stared at the black telephone. He drained the scotch from his paper cup and crushed it in his big fist. Too short for college basketball, too light for football, too slow for baseball, he had tried tennis, track, even fencing, before he settled on Yale's rowing team, which was a good match for his strong hands. He still raced one-man sculls at dawn before his late-sleeping wife Tammy woke, and he got an hour of grueling exercise on the Potomac before going to the office. Treacher tossed the crumpled cup into the wastebasket and turned his attention to the silvered smokiness of the room's two-way mirror. Between 2 queen-size beds, there was a nightstand with a forest green banker's lamp, a telephone, and the afternoon's tabloid, which had been folded in thirds after having been read and discarded. A middle-aged man sat on the bed nearest the window. He wore a gray suit jacket, but he had no tie, slacks, shoes, or socks. He was morosely slumped, half undressed, on the edge of the bed, cradling his head.